Joe Biden's immigration policy positions. Has anybody actually taken a look at them? We're going to look at them today. I'm Dan Stein, president of FAIR, and I'm joined by Jessica Vaughn, who's the director of policy studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. Listen, you get our content, you click subscribe if this is on YouTube and you're watching it. You get to see all the stuff we put out all the time. So I know you'll want to tune in, not miss a moment. Now, Jessica, one of the nation's foremost experts on all manner of immigration policy. And if you haven't had time to take a look at what Joe Biden has promised in his Unity Platform for America, Jessica is going to talk a little about that, and we're going to talk a little bit about what we think maybe some of the numerical projections might be. Now, FAIR's taken a bit of a look at this, but Jessica, have you seen from Vice President Biden any analysis from the campaign about how many people might become immigrants, get green cards, or what the projections over time might be based on what he's promised?
No, he really avoids talking about numbers in his immigration platform. The only numbers that I saw was repeated reference to 11 million people living here illegally, although he doesn't use that term, of course. The word illegal appears maybe twice in his whole platform. But that's the only number I remember seeing was an amnesty for more than 11 million, described as hardworking, productive, contributing immigrants, which they aren't. He's referring to the illegally settled population, which we think is more than 11 million. But that's really the cornerstone of his immigration policy would be immediate amnesty for everyone living here in the country, even some who've been deported, and welcoming who knows how many more people here, either through expansions of legal immigration, guest worker programs, or bringing back people who were deported before, or offering asylum throughout the globe, but especially from the Western Hemisphere.
Well, what about the immediate relatives of the people who get an amnesty, for example? Take those 11 million. We know President Obama talked about an extended, deferred kind of amnesty enforcement for their immediate relatives, right? Can we assume Biden would want to do the same thing?
Oh, definitely. He would find a lot of different ways to make sure that pretty much everyone who's here now or wants to come here, whether by being sponsored by a family member or an employer or claiming asylum, would be able to do so, whether it's through an amnesty or just expanding the legal immigration caps, if they really would be caps, which I'm not sure they would be, or by coming on an allegedly temporary work visa, or as refugees, any number of ways. I think he pretty much covers almost anybody in the world who would want to come here. So it's pretty open. I think, it's fair to call it an open borders position.
Well, yeah, from a sort of a threshold analysis, he basically said, I want to undo everything President Trump has done over 4 years, right? So President Trump has reduce refugee flows, right? So what can we assume Biden would do for refugee flows?
Well, he says he'll increase them. That's one of the elements spelled out in his platform. And not only that, he would go back to some of the Obama era definitions for asylum applicants, like people who claim to have been victims of domestic violence or witnessed gang violence in their home countries.
And what about the Central American migrant program, where people apply for asylum from home country?
Oh, he definitely would bring that back. And he talks about establishing refugee processing centers in other countries, in South and Central America and in Mexico. And he talks about restoring, temporary protected status. And, they'll come up with all kinds of ways to give people an opportunity to come here.
Temporary, permanent protected status.
Yeah, right.
Also, but under Obama, the asylum standards, of course, got loosened, but then also the procedures got so encumbered that these caravans were coming and they were taking advantage of the delays in the court system, sending their minor children across without the parents, reuniting them here. Could assume and there would be skyrocketing asylum claims as well over time?
Oh, most definitely. He talks about rolling back all of the Trump reforms that really took care of the crisis at the border. I mean, you can tell what Trump did that worked because Biden's listed as something he's going to undo. And it's all talked about in a very, pious tone in the document. He immediately tries to seize what he thinks is the moral high ground in the opening sentence of this thing by saying, it's wrong that a father comes here seeking asylum and, dies with his daughter trying to do so. Actually, I think it's wrong to have a policy that entices people to turn over their life savings to a criminal smuggling organization and put themselves and their kids in danger to come here. I mean, that's really the morally unjust policy. But Biden tries to characterize open borders as the morally correct stance and one that he's going to achieve if he becomes president.
Well, wasn't Biden behind elements of that Wilberforce anti-trafficking law that the smugglers have taken such advantage of?
That's a good question. I'm not so sure. It's really hard. I mean, honestly, I'm never sure if he was really behind these things. If people think it's good, he claims he was. If he wasn't.
Feinstein and Biden were two of the original co-sponsors.
I didn't know that.
Bush signed the bill, of course, but no, it was Biden and Feinstein were primary motivators behind a bill that wound up in nominally designed to prevent minor trafficking, which turned out to get exploited by smugglers trafficking minors. And instead of coming back and saying, "Ooh, looks like we kind of made a mistake and it's not working as intended," they seem to be quite content with the caravans coming in and other things that have been produced as a result of that. Right. So what, is exactly the basis for a policy that has no numbers attached to it, no cost projections, no demographic impact projections, no analysis of how the additional population is going to be provided for in terms of infrastructure, road, housing, services, jobs, effect on Americans, hardworking American families, so many of whom are unemployed right now. How can a major party platform like this come out without any kind of, has there been an example of anything quite so dramatic before?
The closest example would have to be the Gang of Eight bill from 2013. That was an immigration extravaganza that would have increased legal immigration, temporary guest worker programs, and eviscerated enforcement of our immigration laws for all but the most heinous criminals. And it's really like a combination of the Gang of Eight bill plus the Obama lack of enforcement, with a few other digs in there at enforcement that come from Kamala Harris's past positions. Mm-hmm. So, if a lot of it he could not be accomplished unless he also has a Democratic Senate. But there's a lot that he would try to do through executive action, I'm sure, as Obama did. And I'm not sure we can rely on the courts to have some of the same readings that we've seen recently. So he could get a lot done. It reminds me of the Gang of Eight, 2.0.
Yeah, except there aren't any Republicans involved in this campaign. Well, I guess there are some never-Trumpers, but what do you make of Cecilia Munoz, who was an assistant to Barack Obama for 8 years in the White House as a domestic policy council advisor? Cecilia Munoz has joined the transition team. to, I guess, helm Joe Biden's immigration work. What does that tell us?
Well, that again, it's going to be all the things that she didn't get done while she was in the Obama White House for 8 years. So, there are a lot of unfinished things, I'm sure, on that list, like a massive amnesty for everyone here and a significant increase in legal admissions. They just want to not have any more illegal immigration by making it possible for anyone to come here legally, one way or another, and to make it impossible for immigration enforcement to happen, whether at the border or, more importantly, in the interior of the country.
Well, that's my last point about Biden. Before we leave Biden, the question of interior enforcement and what would happen. We see these examples every day. Criminal aliens now getting released routinely by jurisdictions that are not honoring requests from federal government to hold them for deportation, removal. They are just let go back in society. Frequently, they will then commit another crime. Interior enforcement is kind of the sine qua non of effective overall immigration law enforcement. And under Biden, given what we know about his plans for legalization and amnesty and other facets, what would happen to interior immigration enforcement?
Well, this is, to me, one of the most shocking aspects of his platform, if it's possible to be shocked by anything after all these years. But it shows us really how far the Democrats have strayed away from any sort of reasonableness on immigration policy. He says flat out that there will be a 100-day moratorium on deportations and that there will be no more worksite enforcement, and that there will be a lot of oversight and restrictions on how ICE can do its job, and how the Border Patrol and Customs and Border Protection can do their jobs at the ports of entry and along the border. That the only people who will be subject to enforcement would be people who've committed the most heinous crimes. So, that's really, there's some talk about security and addressing the root causes of irregular migration, but really it's a shutdown of enforcement, which of course benefits employers as much as anybody else, the employers who are exploiting illegal workers and, bypassing American workers. So it used to be that even Democrats would talk about border security and acknowledge the need for it in order to justify high levels of legal immigration. But he doesn't even make a pretense of wanting to have much enforcement at all. And I think Americans can understand where that would lead us.
Well, the International Labor Union objected to the push by some Republicans and some Democrats to increase the H-2Bs that were paused by this administration, and they objected, which shows that there are still some labor unions that object to certain elements of the non-immigrant or temporary worker programs, but they don't seem to have any objection to 20 million illegal aliens or TPS or any of those other programs, which makes, at some point, perhaps there would be a tipping point within the Democratic Party where some of these unions would begin to once again object to the labor market impact. But it sounds like under a Biden administration, immigration would literally be limited only by who's able to get into the country.
I think so. And I think a lot of this has to do with the disconnect between these labor leaders who are in Washington and who are really part of the Democratic establishment, and the actual workers who are feeling the effects of these disastrous policies that we've had for too long. Where we do see some pushback is more in some of the white collar occupations that have been displaced by the guest worker programs like H-1B and OPT and the L visas. I think the labor unions do see immigrants, legal or otherwise, as the future of their membership and the future of their strength, as organizations and their ability to be political players. But, I'm not so sure that they can hold on to that for much longer, especially given the fact that a lot of Trump voters are, voting for Trump because of his immigration policies. And they feel that they've been forsaken and, discarded by some of these mainstream groups and groups that have become part of the swamp, in effect.
Oh, and we're beginning to see some of these employers like the ski resorts and resort towns and others who historically have relied on these temporary foreign workers are actually reaching out and hiring Americans in the last several months.
Isn't that interesting? When they don't have access to guest workers, all of a sudden they can find American workers.
Pretty remarkable. Well, so let's move to the Trump administration and taking just a look back, you're such an expert, these last 4 years. What would you say the top and most important three things, maybe the top three things the Trump administration has done on the immigration front that, assuming they weren't reversed immediately, have had the biggest impact?
Good question. I would have to say number one is the border situation, getting control of the crisis at the border and making progress there, both by building more wall, but also by shutting down this influx of families and kids and others from mainly from Central America, but really from all over the world, and not just ending catch and release, but that was important, but more importantly, actually denying them entry into the United States at all. Because as you and I both know, once people get here, it's very hard for us to make our immigration system work to enforce the law. So, hands down, getting control of the border has been the biggest accomplishment. And that was important because it was a genuine crisis and would be still if it weren't for the steps that he's taken. And doing some regulatory things to support it, like fixing, some of the loopholes in the asylum system and making people wait in Mexico or other countries before they could apply for asylum, and addressing some of the problems in the immigration court. Number two, I think, has to be a big reduction in refugee admissions, and also giving state and local governments a real voice in the process, and giving them the ability to say, no, we're good on refugees for now. Let's bring in some other areas of to help with this. And of course, the vetting system, improving the vetting goes along with that. So hands down, it was time to cut the refugee admissions. Thirdly, I would say the variety of different actions that the president took to try to rein in use of the guest worker programs. I think a lot was done there that has not gotten a lot of attention, but that has, things that seem obvious, I think, to most Americans, like doing site visits to make sure that employers asking for guest workers are actually real employers, and cutting down on fraud, and prosecuting people who were taking advantage of guest worker programs or replacing Americans. Now, I think more can be done. I'm pretty sure you would agree with that. But that was a big step to really try to end the most egregious practices in these guest worker programs. So I hope some of that will be sustained, and there's a lot more to do in a second Trump administration, but that has helped a lot. And, a lot of little things, like stepping into the Tennessee Valley Authority situation where they were about to lay off about 200 Americans and allow them to be replaced by guest workers. That kind of thing is not necessary. It shouldn't be allowed. It's wrong. And he took action. And that's the first time I can remember an American president stepping in on a guest worker issue like that.
Yeah, well, for those people who say, Trump really didn't meet his promises on immigration, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say, yes, there are some more things that need to be done, but he did a lot. And we have to remember that there was a bona fide crisis at the border. And that, I think, was the highest priority to fix. Mm-hmm. He's built some wall as promised. He's fixed a lot of the asylum loopholes as promised, and addressed, the things that we just talked about. I would like to have seen more done in the area of immigration enforcement, particularly in the interior, especially worksite enforcement. I think that's been a glaring gap between what he promised and what he's delivered. I would also say in the president's defense that he's had to deal with lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit and hostile hostile federal judges, and has addressed that himself by appointing judges who are going to be loyal to the Constitution and not hostile to enforcement. And, a lot of this is going to take time to play out. But, I think he should have more than a passing grade, really a good grade from voters on his work on immigration. And, there's always more that can be done, but I think he's made a great start.
Well, are there aspects of the opposition to the president that surprised you in terms of its virility, its, voraciousness, its the caliber of its opposition to some things that we thought were kind of settled regarding, say, the president's authority to suspend immigration or to invoke, national security or foreign affairs considerations, whether it was the travel ban or the, keep in place in Mexico or stay in Mexico, or what have you. And were you surprised by the vociferousness of the opposition going from virtually every angle to try to attack everything the administration did?
I was a little bit surprised at the volume of lawsuits. I mean, I think we all knew that the open border side was going to fight hard, but I was surprised at the willingness of some federal judges to, in my view, abuse their authority to put a stop to this. And I was surprised at some of the really outrageous accusations, that everything he did was motivated by racial animus and so on. And, especially the DACA case was kind of surprising to me, the way the Supreme Court ruled on that. Essentially, Chief Justice Roberts, deciding that one president cannot undo a memorandum issued by a previous president. I was surprised at that.
Basis, by the way, that had,
pardon me?
The original memo having had no legal basis.
Right.
A subsequent administration can't undo a legal memo. And then it wasn't just that they said they violated the Administrative Procedure Act, but they said that they thought his reasoning was pretextual.
Yeah.
It was an extraordinary thing for a court to do.
It was a real stretch, and it just seemed very political to me. Now, the irony of it is that President Trump was willing to make a deal very early in his administration that would have provided a path to citizenship for people with DACA, and they rejected it because it wasn't enough, and it had, it was, came with the wall, and they chose the courts instead to try to win. And the result of that has been they've been prolonged in this DACA status for longer than necessary. And that was, I think that was a pretty stupid way for them to go about it. But, and it's never enough. We're also learning, though, that, of course, this is not just about the people with DACA. It's about their parents and their neighbors and everyone else who in the world who wants to come here. Well, DACA was only the wedge.
With Ancestry.com, everybody can kind of figure out this, wow, I got relations all over the place.
Yeah, well, we still have borders, though, too, and we still have good reasons for having those borders. So,
well, there's a new book coming out, or came out yesterday, called 1 Billion Americans by Matthew Yglesias, who's a co-founder of Vox, V-O-X, kind of a left-of-center publication. But this is sort of a rare example of someone on the left sort of recharging the old pro-natalist, nationalist argument that we have to grow to be bigger than China if we're going to compete. Any idea what the significance of this is, coming from someone on the left side of the spectrum, that we suddenly abandon a commitment to population stabilization as a nation?
Well, that's the very troubling overtone to me, is that the left has completely, given up, or, is now suppressing this idea that population growth, particularly when driven by immigration, can do environmental damage and destroy quality of life in a place. It sounds like it's meant to justify open borders. I mean, the title of it, A Billion Americans, reminds me of the books that Leon Bouvier wrote way back when I first joined the center, about 50 million Californians and 30 million Texans.
Do that. See the state kind of burning up, people building houses in every conceivable nook and cranny of California's forests. And
how many schools would have to be built to accommodate this population, and how many roads, and how much our civil liberties can shrink when population grows to the point where, we don't have the same freedoms in some ways. I mean, that's become apparent to a lot of us during this pandemic as well. So, but it is concerning to see that the left does not want to acknowledge the environmental and quality of life impacts of population growth. And most of our population growth today, more than 70% of it, is due to immigration. And not just immigration, but also chain migration that is allowed in our system, where every immigrant brings an average of three and a half new immigrants, family members, and also birthright citizenship. And the effects of that were illustrated again recently with this TPS case, where people with TPS were suing Trump to try to block the wind down of this so-called temporary program. There was it was revealed that something like 330-some thousand TPS beneficiaries have had about 220,000 US-born children in the time that they have been here. And so that shows us that it's not just about how many immigrants we admit, but the long-term effects of chain migration and birthright citizenship that make any immigration action much more consequential in population terms than people often realize. And that's why we need to see environmental impact statements for all presidential immigration actions, that has to be a regular part of policymaking on the immigration front, I think.
Don't you think things like birthright citizenship make things like TPS and certain kinds of guest worker programs unworkable?
Yes. And I used to sort of think that, the way to make birthright citizenship less consequential is to just, cut down on illegal immigration, but that's just not realistic anymore. With all of these other exploding so-called temporary programs, bringing people in and seeing the way even birth tourism works, how many people there are who will come here just to have a child on US soil, and that child becomes a citizen. And a lot of people don't realize their children become citizens as well, even if they're raised abroad and have no meaningful contact with the United States. So I would like to see Trump do more on that issue. I think people understand that issue very viscerally and would like to see action on that as well.
All right. Well, my last question here, Jessica, you've been doing this a long time and you know a lot about the topic. So if I were to ask you, in a country of about 330 million Americans, obviously we have foreign born in there too, but how many Americans do you think really have a full, meaningful understanding of the immigration problem and how it all works?
Well, I think most Americans do understand certain fundamental things. And I think that the average American's ideal immigration policy was articulated by Barbara Jordan when she headed up the Commission on Immigration Reform back in the mid-90s. And that is that people we want to come here who should get in. People who don't are excluded, and anyone who's here who shouldn't be here gets removed. It's really that simple. that's what people want to see. They want to see reasonable levels of immigration, closer to historical immigration levels, which are much lower than we have today. They don't want to see their fellow Americans or legal immigrants replaced by guest workers because they can be paid less. And they want immigration to be legal. They recognize that illegal immigration is a slap in the face to legal immigrants, and that it causes problems in our communities, and that it's expensive. And so, I think most Americans, while they may not know, that they may be shocked to hear that we admit 1 million legal immigrants each year, and about 750,000 temporary workers, and that we give out more than 1 million work permits to people who are here who weren't admitted for work. They may not know these numbers, but they see what's happening in their communities. They read, the media and see that there's a human cost to sanctuaries and to not enforcing our immigration laws, and they can understand this, and they don't. And they want there to be a meaning to American citizenship, and that we want to have immigrants who are going to become contributing Americans and who are going to be self-sufficient. So, I think that is the key to a lot of Donald Trump's popularity with voters, is that they do understand it, and that they think this issue is important to our country's future, to our children's future, and they don't want to succumb to an open borders mentality.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Well, okay, so we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank Jessica Vaughn, who's the Director of Policy Studies at the Center for Immigration Studies. If you have never been to the CIS, Center for Immigration Studies website, it's www.cis.org, cis.org. Fabulous organization. The Center for Immigration Studies puts out some of the finest immigration-related research in the country. They are a very, very capable group of people who will give you an honest assessment, full-on expertise, and anything you could ask for to learn about immigration policy. And Jessica's one of the really finest professionals in the field in this country. I'm Dan Stein, and of course, I'm president of FAIR, and we are at www.fair, F-A-I-R-U-S, fairus.org. And again, remember to subscribe to our video. Really appreciate you taking time to watch, and I want to thank you again, Jessica, for joining me, and we will talk to you again soon.